Imagine yourself sitting there and reaching out to God's light and offering the energy that we have gathered here into that purifying light. So, is the ego a friend or a foe? Yes, depends. Good morning, everyone. So today's topic, the ego, is something we all have. We don't really want to admit how much of it we have. We're quick to point out that others should have less, and completely clueless about how to have a little less of it ourselves. It frequently gets us into trouble. So I thought I'd start with a joke. It's a light bulb joke, no less. How many egotistical people does it take to change a light bulb? The answer is one. He holds the light bulb in place and the entire universe revolves around him. So that's the problem with the ego, is we end up becoming self-centered. And Swami Kriyananda defined mental illness as the inability to see the other's point of view, or the inability to think of others. It's also the biggest spiritual illness, because with self-centeredness comes a sense of unconscious and very powerful entitlement, that it is mine, I need to have it, and we literally end up not tuning into the fact that there are other people in the room, there are other people in our lives. I have a very dear friend in India, bless his heart, and every time I go back to India, he says, "Oh, you never have enough time to spend with me. Remember when in childhood we just hung out all the time together," and so on. And I feel his heart. But whenever I go talk to him, all he talks about is himself, entirely. Sometimes 3 hours straight, 4 hours straight, there is a bottomless wellspring of all the things that he's going through at this moment that is the most important thing in the universe. And I can't get in a word edgewise, and that's okay. He's a good friend. I don't particularly want to listen to his tales of woe, but I don't mind it if it helps him. But the problem is it doesn't, because all it does is just makes whatever it is much bigger. So the problem with being self-centered, again, is there is a curious blindness to how we come across, because a sharp ego, selfishness, ends up causing things like anger and pride and envy, arrogance, and things like that. There was once, I have a large extended family. There are 7 of us siblings, 4. I have to count myself, 5 brothers and 2 sisters. And I was driving with my sister, and it was, on long drives, you kind of mellow down and you begin to talk. Some nice good sharing sometimes happen on long drives with siblings. And so we were talking about this and that, and then my sister, out of the blue, she said, you have a quick temper like all your brothers. You get angry very quickly. And you know how I reacted to it? It was with anger. It's like, why do you think I have a quick temper? And then it took me a while, several miles, to figure out, oh yeah, I do have a quick temper. That's kind of that's why hanging out with egotistical people, none of us are egotistical, of course, certainly not I, but the other people, so we can talk about them in the third person. Hanging out with egotistical people is, this sharpness comes across as, pride and things like that. And both the Bible and the Bhagavad-gita are really unanimous about the effects of being this way. One of the most famous proverbs in the Bible, which you all know, it says, "Pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall." Pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Haughty spirit means arrogance. And elsewhere, I think it's in the Gospel of John, I think, it says that where there is envy and selfishness, there be chaos and all manner of evil works. So the Bible's pretty upfront. It's saying big ego equals bad. The Bhagavad-gita comes at it from the other direction. It talks about what happens when you don't have a big ego. And there are many verses in there that talks about it. And one of the nicest ones is in Bhagavad-gita chapter 12. Chapter 12 it's the smallest chapter, I think. It has only 20 verses, and it's called Bhakti Yoga. It's the chapter on devotion. And of these 20, about 8 of them are known as the Same Priyaha verses. Same Priyaha in Sanskrit means such a one is dear to me. And I remember it's probably 15 years ago, a little after Swami Kriyananda released his book, The Essence of the Bhagavad-gita, Hriman and Padma at the time gave a deep dive in 8-week class, I think it was, on the Bhagavad-gita. And during one of the weeks, Padma was leading the class on chapter 12, Bhakti Yoga. And then in the beginning part of it, she explained how God works with his devotees and doesn't explain anything. And then in the latter part, when she came to the Same Priyaha verses, I remember this distinctly, she said, I'm just going to read it to you because there is nothing that I can add that will make it any clearer. And she kept reading, one who is without malice, such a one is dear to me. One who is without bad intention, and one who is always content, such a one is dear to me. And it just went on and on. Such a heart-opening experience just to listen to this intimate dialogue between God and his devotee, all in first person. It says, all you need to do is this, and then you're dear to me. And then it starts by keeping the bar very high. It says, once you give up all the sense pleasures and renounce everything, such a one is dear to me. And then it keeps lowering the bar little by little, so that in the end, well, guess what? You're dear to me no matter what. It kind of comes down that way. But coming back to the ego, one of these Same Priyaha verses, it says, Sarvarambha Parityagi Yomad Bhaktaha Same Priyaha. Sarvarambha Parityagi Yomad Bhaktaha Same Priyaha. And it means one who is without ego motivation is my true devotee and is dear to me. So you kind of see at the Bible picks it up from the perspective of what happens when you have a sharp ego. It says, destruction and downfall, and the Bhagavad-gita says what happens when you don't have it, and that is you become a true devotee, you acquire peace. So it's pretty clear. It says big ego equals bad, no ego equals good. And since the topic of today is about ego, technically I should be done at this point. I should have no more to say. But actually I do, because there is a little bit of a nuance here. I'll come to that nuance because knowing this little nuance that's where all the spiritual practices come in. So let me take a few moments to flesh it out. Think about it for a moment. Can you really be without ego? I don't mean it as, it's so difficult that I cannot be without ego, but just from a laws of God perspective, is it possible to be without the sense? Ego means the sense of I am. Is it possible to be without the sense of I am? There is a story that Ramakrishna Paramahamsa is a famous saint, as you must have heard of. He lived in the mid to late 19th century. He was a contemporary mostly of Lahiri Mahashai, but also partly of Swami Sri Yukteswar. And he used to tell all these stories, and one of the nicest ones has to do with ego. So it's something like this. There was a village, and outside the village was a meadow. The meadow had grass and other things. And so the cowherds in the village, who were boys, they used to take the cows there to graze. And at the other end of the meadow was a snake. The snake was very vicious. It was a big cobra, and it had so much anger in it. It was always vicious, and anybody that came into its domain, it would unthinkingly come out and kill that person or animal, whatever it was. So a sadhu, a saint, walks through one day, and he goes into the meadow, and the boys run after him and says, "Sir, please don't go to that corner of the meadow, there is a snake." And the sadhu says, "It's okay, I've dealt with angry snakes before. I have a mantra, a sacred incantation that's going to make them as docile as an earthworm." And so the sadhu goes, and the boys don't follow him. And then the snake, sure enough, it comes out, it's a great big cobra, it slithers to him, and then its mouth is open, the fang is dripping venom, and the venom interacts with the atmosphere and is causing some toxic fumes all around. And with lightning speed, the snake comes towards the sadhu. And the sadhu just stands there and begins to recite in resonant tones this ancient mantra. The sounds of the syllables, the prosody and the meter and the resonance creates such an extraordinary vibration that it enters into the heart of the snake and dissolves all the anger that it had. Without the motivating power of all the anger, the snake's viciousness dissipates, and then it just falls at his feet, completely docile, like an earthworm, as the sadhu said. And then the sadhu looks at it and says, "Snake, why do you insist on harming people? That's just wrong behavior. I know you're a snake, but you really shouldn't be doing that." And the snake said, "Sir, I always had this anger in me, and this anger motivated me to kill people. If you had told me 5 minutes before, don't do that, I wouldn't know what you mean, because that's entirely, I always had this anger. Now that you've showed me with the power of your mantra what it feels like to be without anger, I now know this feels so much better." And then it says, "Sir, please, I know as soon as you leave, that anger will come back. I can feel it rearing its head within me. Will you please teach me something so that I can stay in this beautiful state for longer?" And the sadhu says, "Okay, snake, I'll do that. I'll give you a holy word, and you need to repeat this holy word, and you shouldn't harm people. And if you keep doing that, this will take you closer to God, and when you perceive God, your anger will disappear." And the snake says, "Yes, sir, thank you." And he gives the diksha, the initiation. He whispers the holy word to the snake, and he says, "I'll come back in a year, and I'll check and see how you're doing." Snake says, "Yes, sir," and says, "Okay, be well, snake, bye." And then he goes off, and the snake begins to repeat the holy word. And a few days pass. The power of this diksha and the word is so great that just within a few days, the snake's anger mostly disappears. And it stops attacking people that come close to its part of the meadow. The boys are watching all of this. They are very tuned. The snake is a big part of their lives. Oh, they are watching, and then say, "Oh, this snake seems to have changed." And so they threw stones at it. And so the snake, well, it didn't do anything. Normally, it would have come and attacked them. So emboldened by this, one of the boys goes, takes the tail of the snake. It's a great big cobra, remember, takes its tail of the snake and then swirls it around and then dashes it against one of the rocks in the meadow. The snake is stunned, it's unconscious, it's battered, bruised, and bloody. And because it's unconscious, the boys think that it's dead. And then they go back, and in the evening, the snake painfully crawls into its little hole, and then keeps repeating the holy word. And then it's afraid to come out during daytime because it'll be attacked by the boys again. So it comes out only during night and eats whatever leaves and fruits that have fallen down on the meadow. And a year passes. The sadhu comes back again, and the boys say, "Sir, if you're looking for the snake, it's dead." Sadhu says, no, absolutely not. I said I'll be back in a year. The snake won't be dead. So he goes, he says, snake, snake, where are you? Then he searches for a little bit, and then he goes into the hole and says, snake, are you in there? The snake is very happy. He heard its guru's voice. It comes out. How are you, snake? Sir, I'm doing very well. It says, no, you're not. You're very thin. Why are you so thin? And you see, the snake's heart is so pure at this point that it bears no malice to the boys that caused this grave injury to it. And if you don't bear any malice, if there is no anger reaction in you, then it's a non-event, isn't it? So the snake has forgotten that the boys have abused it. Its heart is so pure. So it thinks and says, sir, I think it's because I stopped eating meat. This vegetarian diet has made me a little thin. And the sadhu says, no, 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 I've seen many vegetarian snakes, and they lose some weight. It's good for them in the beginning, but it's a healthy weight, but you look like you're about to die. Think hard, what something else is going on. And the snake thinks and says, yeah, you know, these boys, they abused me and they kind of dashed me against this rock. And since then, I feel some bones have broken and some internal bleeding. And the sadhu says, oh, what a shame, snake. You are such a fool. He said, you have to protect yourself against wicked people. You don't have to wish harm to them. I prohibited you from harming people. Did I prohibit you from hissing at people? You have to hiss at wicked people. Establish that boundary. Don't wish harm. Don't be motivated by anger, but still protect yourself. Because if you die, you cannot repeat the holy word. And how will you attain liberation? You need your body in order to come close to God. Otherwise, you will die and come right back into this meadow and start from where you left off. And I have to come back again. It's very far from where I am. So don't do this. You're a stupid snake. Snake says, okay, sir, thank you. Now I get what you're saying. And then it establishes those boundaries, and very soon it's liberated. It's a pretty self-explanatory story, isn't it? But it does lead us to a dilemma. That's why I wanted to build up to this dilemma so I can flesh it out. So you do need the sense of self, the ego. But on the other hand, we saw that the fruits of ego, the pride and envy and all of that lead to downfall. So there is something going on. It's like, pure gold is very soft. And so it's impossible to make jewelry from pure gold. You have to make it brittle. Brittleness is actually fragility. You think you are making it hard, you're actually making it brittle. So they add some poor quality metals into it. They take pure gold and add copper or brass or nickel or something. That's how you get 14 karat gold, or in India 22 karat. And that takes this noble metal that's soft and pliable and adaptable and makes it into something hard. This is kind of what's going on with the ego. The ego itself, see, I asked you one question. Is it possible to live without a sense of I am? And we saw, well, maybe possible, but it's pretty dangerous. You won't get very far. Is it even possible to get rid of the ego? Well, this is a very interesting question. Jesus said, before Moses was, I am. I am, the sense of ego, and this mixing of tenses here, before Moses was, before, past tense, I am, now, that's the way, it's a beautiful way of expressing the eternity of the soul. The sense of I am is eternal. Indeed, there are two verses in the Bhagavad-gita, and I'm going to recite them to you in fullness. And again, remember, these are probably, almost certainly, the words of Krishna as he spoke it to Arjuna. It goes something like this. It says, Na jayate mriyate va kadachinnayam bhutva bhavita vana bhuyaha ajo nityah shashvatoyam purano na hanyate hanyamane sharire nainam chindanti shastrani nainam dahati pavakaha na chainam kledayantyapo nanu shoshayati marutaha. So what this is saying is the self is birthless, eternal, changeless, ancient. Weapons cannot harm it, fire cannot burn it, water cannot drown it, the wind cannot wither it away. How did we get from that soul, ajo nitya shashvatoyam, purano na hanyate hanyamane sharire, to this ego that's filled with pride, that pure gold, to this alloyed gold that is brittle? It's that impurity that we need to extract. There is something, the pure self, which is ancient, eternal, that we need, and there is something else that they are attached together. When we cleave it, when we create that separation, spiritual practices enter into that separation. See, that's what I'm trying to get at. So here's how Paramahansa Yogananda explained it. Paramahansa Yogananda, whose teachings we follow here. He said that when you think about a horse and you say, this is my horse, that's the I am coming into picture and saying, doing what I am does, which is possess something else. And what he said was, that's okay. You're not on the slippery slope yet, because it's my horse, or if you're a yogi in the Himalayas, you say my water pot and my own board. It's okay, and if it goes away, that's okay too. I am eternal, changeless, purano na hanyate hanyamane sharire. It doesn't matter. The trouble, that's pure gold. The trouble begins when the heart comes into the picture in the wrong way. It says, I love my horse. Implicit in I love my horse is, I'd be really sad if I didn't have my horse. And from there comes, I'd be so angry if somebody took away my horse. I'm so proud that I have a horse and you don't. I'm so envious that I have one horse and you have 5. And it kind of comes that way. And this is the one that makes us brittle. This sense of self combined with likes and dislikes together create an ego that is contractive. That ego is fragile. It says, I did so many things, nobody noticed, I'm just going to stop doing things and take some me time. Or it becomes possessive. It says, you're only allowed to love me and nobody else. This is mine, you shall not touch it. And it becomes transactional. I do this with the full expectation that something similar comes back to me, and it becomes demanding. I want my morning coffee and nothing shall stand between me and that. This mental flexibility goes away. So this is how the gold, ancient, birthless, eternal I am, which is necessary. Without that, there is no spiritual growth. After all, that's what we are trying to expand into. Becomes fragile, possessive, demanding, and transactional. So that's cutting that bond, cutting this ancient self that is within all of us. The bond it has towards likes and dislikes, cleaving that bond is the entire spiritual path. Every spiritual practice across every religion, every spiritual tradition does that, and only that is necessary, no more. So then the question is, how would you do it? And there are many, many, many techniques, but I'd like to highlight a few very simple ones. The first one, Swami Kriyananda talks about this in, I think, his book, Art and Science of Raja Yoga. It's an odd little technique. So he says, every day, do something different. Not big things, maybe big things, good for you if you've been a couch potato all your life and you say, from tomorrow I'm going to do something different, get up at 4, meditate for 5 hours, fast for the next 3 days. You'll confront your likes and dislikes, and if you are able to manage it, then your soul will be in a different place. But what about if every day you get up in the morning and drink coffee? Instead say, I won't drink coffee for 3 hours after I get up. This is very powerful. I've tried this so many times. Here's what happens. Here is how the mind reacts to it. You get up in the morning, no coffee, okay, gotta wait until, 9 o'clock before I drink coffee, this feels wrong. Then you're sad, you're indignant. But during these 3 hours, that's the battlefield. You confront your likes and dislikes, and you really, trust me, you go through the gamut of emotions during that time. And then at the end of it, sure, you'll drink your coffee, there is delayed gratification, it's that much more pleasurable, but you would have found a part of yourself that had transcended that particular like and dislike. That cleave, that little gap has been established where God can enter. See what I'm saying? It's very powerful. It doesn't have to, you could do it with coffee. If you walk every day, take a different trail just to see what happens. Or talk to a coworker who always rubs you the wrong way and see what happens. These little things, it's a very wonderful way of cutting this impurity and therefore going back into the higher self, as Sriman mentioned in his prayer. The other way, of course, is through service. Jyotish wrote a little book, it's called The Heart of Service. And in that book, the very first page, he says, when you serve selflessly, God blesses you. And that is, you can think of it as cause and effect, but you can think of it also as a mechanism of the universe. The more we do something not for selfish reasons, the more we open up the portal for God's grace. So when you serve selflessly, God blesses you. How about God as the doer? This is another very important aspect of it. This once Master Yogananda asked Swami Kriyananda, he asked him, the Hollywood church, after Sunday service, he said, go greet people, shake hands with them. And Swamiji did that. And then he went back and said, Master, I'm not ready for this yet because I'm so tired. Because, the exchange of magnetism. He said, I'm so tired. And Master said, that's because you thought of yourself. Instead, think of God. Think that God is doing this through you. And Swamiji went back next week. And he writes in his book, The Path, he says, I was so uplifted, there was not an ounce of tiredness, I was filled with energy. See, when you think of God as the doer, the soul can automatically expand instead of contracting towards its source. So it's a very powerful technique that you can very practically implement into your daily life. And the final one is what we did in meditation today, that when you finish with all of your techniques, you're sitting there, now this is your time with God, not even disturbed by acts of will, you're just there. This is the time when God says, such a one is dear to me, same priyaha. So you sit there, imagine your little self here, this is the center of the ego. The sixth chakra has the ego center and kutastha, the higher self, Christ consciousness. You're sitting, this is duality, ego, and this is beyond duality, vibrationless reflection of God. So imagine yourself sitting there and reaching out to God's light and offering the energy that we have gathered here into that purifying light. This is another beautiful technique. In fact, this inner offering is what powers and animates our outer offerings, whether it is doing something new each day or serving God as the doer. They all come down to this particular offering, from the medulla to the point between the eyebrows. The entire spiritual path is along the two poles of the Agya, the sixth chakra. So is the ego a friend or a foe? Yes, depends. A contractive ego is what we try to avoid, and the only way to avoid it is to do the opposite, the expansive ego. So I'll end with this reading from the poem Samadhi. Samadhi is the state that, I've been talking about expansive ego. When it fully expands, how does it feel? And here are the 3 lines from there. It's a poem written by Paramahansa Yogananda. He says, Samadhi but extends my conscious realm beyond the limits of the mortal frame to the farthest boundary of eternity, where I, the cosmic sea, watch the little ego floating in me. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Amen.
What is love? Is it only ours? Or does love whisper in the flowers?